A quiet but powerful shift is unfolding in West Africa, and it's one that could send shockwaves far beyond the Sahel. In a move that many analysts are calling unprecedented, the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have reportedly pooled together a staggering $1 billion to launch three major pillars of economic independence: a regional airline, a joint investment bank, and a transnational railway system connecting the Sahel. At first glance, this might look like a development initiative. But beneath the surface, this is something far more strategic and far more unsettling for Western powers. These three nations, all currently under military-led governments, have increasingly distanced themselves from traditional Western alliances. Their break from ECOWAS and growing resistance to influence from countries like France and the United States signals a deeper shift. A move towards self-reliance and regional control over resources, infrastructure, and financial systems. Now consider the implications. A shared airline reduces dependency on foreign carriers that dominate African airspace. A regional investment bank could bypass institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, institutions long criticized for influencing African economies through debt and policy conditions. And perhaps most critically, a railway line connecting these nations could unlock trade routes independent of coastal ports historically tied to Western economic networks. But the timing is what raises eyebrows. This comes amid increasing geopolitical tension, shifting alliances, and growing anti-West sentiment in parts of Africa. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore have openly criticized foreign interference, while military governments in the region are consolidating power internally. Is this economic cooperation, or the foundation of a new bloc entirely? Western observers are beginning to ask whether this is the early stage of a Sahelian alliance that could eventually align more closely with rival global powers. There are already whispers of alternative partnerships, security agreements, and resource deals happening quietly behind closed doors. And then there's the strategic geography. The Sahel sits at the crossroads of Africa, linking North Africa to sub-Saharan trade routes. Control over transport, finance, and air mobility in this region doesn't just boost local economies, it reshapes influence. For decades, Africa's infrastructure and financial systems have been heavily intertwined with Western frameworks. But what happens when a region begins to systematically detach itself? What happens when countries once dependent on external systems begin building their own, together? And more importantly, who stands to lose the most if this succeeds? Because if this initiative is more than just economic development, if it is the blueprint for a new order in West Africa, then the implications may only just be beginning. The three projects aren't just infrastructure porn for Pan-African dreamers. They're precision-engineered economic weapons designed to shatter the Sahel's century-old status as a resource-rich but transport-poor, finance-dependent backwater. And the numbers tell a story the IMF and French Treasury never wanted to hear. Start with the new regional airline. Right now, flying from Ouagadougou to Bamako means routing through Paris or Casablanca, adding 8 to 12 hours and hundreds of dollars per ticket. Intra-Sahel air traffic is a pathetic fraction of what it could be. The AES airline flips that script overnight. Lower fares, direct flights between the three capitals and secondary hubs, dedicated cargo holds for gold, uranium concentrates, livestock, and high-value cash crops like sesame and shea. Economists who have modeled similar African airline launches, think Ethiopian Airlines regional dominance, project a 25 to 40% surge in passenger traffic within 3 years, slashing logistics costs by up to 60%. That translates directly into GDP multipliers. Every new flight route doesn't just move people. It moves ideas, contracts, and capital. Small manufacturers in Bamako can now ship electronics components to Niamey assembly lines the same day instead of waiting weeks on crumbling roads. Tourism, currently negligible, suddenly becomes viable for the region's ancient mosques, desert festivals, and emerging eco-lodges. Foreign executives scouting mining concessions no longer treat a trip to the Sahel like a punishment posting. The airline alone could add 1.5 to 2 percentage points to combined AES GDP growth by 2030 through improved connectivity, according to internal AES feasibility studies circulating in regional finance circles. Then comes the Confederal Investment and Development Bank, BCIDAES, the real financial sovereignty bomb. Capitalized at nearly $900 million in hard domestic cash, roughly 500 billion CFA francs contributed directly by the three states, with plans to feed it 5% of each nation's annual tax revenues plus a confederal levy. This isn't another beggar thy neighbor development fund. It's a war chest free of Paris club strings, World Bank governance lectures, or Eurobond interest rates that have bled African treasuries dry. The bank's mandate is laser-focused: infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and private sector projects that generate hard currency. Think diesel-to-solar microgrids across the Sahel's vast off-grid zones. Niger and Mali already sit on some of the world's highest solar irradiation. Think mechanized irrigation schemes along the Niger River that could double cereal output and slash food import bills. Think downstream processing for the 400-plus tons of gold Burkina and Mali produce yearly, instead of shipping raw or to Europe for refining. By keeping capital inside the region and lending at rates tailored to local realities, not Frankfurt benchmarks, the bank slashes the cost of doing business by 30 to 50% compared to commercial Eurodollar loans. That margin alone makes previously unbankable projects suddenly profitable. Now layer on the Trans-Sahel Railway. A modern standard-gauge line linking Ouagadougou-Bamako-Niamey isn't just pretty steel. It's a logistics revolution. Today, trucking goods across these borders costs 15 to 25 cents per ton-kilometer on terrible roads vulnerable to jihadist ambush and seasonal flooding. Rail drops that to under 4 cents. For mineral exporters, that's the difference between marginal profitability and roaring margins. Niger's uranium, Burkina's manganese and gold, Mali's lithium and phosphate suddenly become globally competitive when they can reach Algerian or Togolese ports reliably. Agricultural surpluses, millet, sorghum, livestock, that rot in the fields today can flood regional markets tomorrow. Construction itself is a job supernova. 15,000 to 25,000 direct positions in civil works, plus tens of thousands in ancillary services, according to comparable African rail projects. Once operational, the line creates permanent skilled employment in maintenance, operations, and logistics hubs. More critically, it attracts the kind of foreign direct investment that actually builds things instead of extracting them. Turkish construction giants, Chinese rail operators, Algerian port authorities, and even Gulf sovereign funds are already quietly circling, drawn by the combination of sovereign backing, mineral collateral, and a political leadership that has proven it can deliver despite sanctions. Investors smell the shift. The old risk equation, unstable coups plus French influence equals unpredictable nationalization, is being rewritten in real time. In its place, a confederation that controls its own security through the joint AES force, its own financing, and now its own connectivity. Mining majors tired of CFA franc volatility and European middlemen see a region that can offer long-term concessions with local processing requirements and actual enforcement power. Agribusinesses see virgin arable land. The Sahel holds millions of hectares of underutilized fertile soil, now reachable by reliable rail and air. Tech and fintech players see a young, increasingly urban population, median age under 20, that will leapfrog straight to mobile banking once the investment bank starts seeding digital infrastructure. The three leaders understand the flywheel effect perfectly. Better transport lowers costs, more production and trade higher tax revenues, stronger bank balance sheet, more lending, even faster growth. It's the opposite of the debt trap cycle the West prescribed for decades. And it's self-financing from day one, funded by the very gold, uranium, and agricultural potential the Sahel already possesses but could never fully monetize under the old order. Western capitals are watching this calculus with barely concealed panic. Every percentage point of intra-AES trade that replaces European routing is a direct hit to Air France, to French mining consultancies, to the CFA franc's relevance. Every loan the new bank issues without an IMF stamp is proof that the rules-based order was never as ironclad as advertised. The money is moving. The steel is being laid. The planes are being ordered. And the investor roadshows, discreet but growing, are already booking flights into the region. The Sahel isn't just building 3 projects. It's building an entirely new economic gravity well, and the world's capital is starting to feel the pull. As momentum builds around these ambitious projects, all eyes turn to Ibrahim Traore as he stepped forward to address the nation, and, by extension, the world. Dressed in his now signature military attire, his presence alone carried symbolism. A leader forged in conflict, now speaking about economic transformation. But it was his words that truly captured attention. He began not with celebration, but with reflection. He spoke of a Sahel long defined by struggle, a region rich in resources, yet burdened by dependency. He reminded listeners that for decades, their wealth, gold, land, labor, had flowed outward, while development lagged behind. His tone was calm, but deliberate, as if each sentence was meant to challenge not just policies, but mindsets. Then came the shift. Traore framed these new initiatives, the airline, the investment bank, the railway, not as projects, but as declarations. According to him, this was a signal that the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were no longer willing to wait for development to be handed to them. He spoke about control of movement, control of capital, control of destiny. In one of the most striking moments of the speech, he emphasized that true independence is not measured by flags or anthems, but by economic sovereignty. Without naming specific nations, he alluded to systems that, in his view, had kept African economies tied to external interests. His words carried a quiet defiance, echoing sentiments that have been growing across the region. But it wasn't just about resistance. Traore painted a vision. He described a future where a young entrepreneur in the Sahel could access funding without leaving the continent, where goods produced locally would travel across borders without unnecessary barriers, where African engineers, pilots, and financiers would drive the engines of their own economies. He spoke directly to the youth, arguably the most powerful segment of his audience. He urged them to see these developments not as government projects, but as opportunities. Opportunities to build, to innovate, to reclaim ownership of their future. There was a strong undertone of responsibility in his message, as if he was passing a baton to a generation that must now prove that this new path can succeed. Then his tone hardened slightly. He warned that change of this magnitude would not come without resistance, that any effort to restructure economic power, especially in a region as strategically important as the Sahel, would attract scrutiny, pressure, and possibly opposition. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. The implication hung in the air. He closed that segment of his speech by reaffirming unity among the three nations, presenting their alliance not as a temporary arrangement, but as the foundation of something enduring. A bloc built not just on shared challenges, but on shared ambition. And as the applause followed, one thing became clear. This was not just a welcome speech. It was a message, to allies, to critics, and to the global stage, that something deeper is unfolding in the Sahel, and it is only just beginning. The applause for Traore was still echoing off the curtains when General Abdourahamane Tiani, Niger's towering military president, moved to the podium with the measured stride of a man who had already stared down two former colonial powers and lived to tell the tale. Dressed in full camouflage with the yellow-green-red sash of the AES across his chest, the 62-year-old former intelligence chief and coup leader didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence alone, the same man who ordered French troops out in 2023, who nationalized uranium exports, who watched the last American drone operators pack up their bags in 2024, was statement enough. What he delivered was not a polite thank you. It was a 14-minute geopolitical earthquake, delivered in the gravelly baritone of a soldier who had spent decades watching his country's most strategic resource, uranium, flow straight into French reactors while his own people sat in the dark. "Brothers of the Sahel," Tiani began, voice low and deliberate. "Today is not a celebration. Today is a reckoning. With this $1 billion, our own blood money, extracted from the same soil they tried to keep us chained to, we are not just building an airline, a bank, and a railway. We are burying the last illusions of Francafrique forever." He let the silence stretch, eyes scanning the room like a general surveying the battlefield. For 60 years, Niger has been the prize. 25% of France's nuclear electricity, that is our uranium, dug from Arlet and shipped to their power plants while our villages still cook with firewood. They called it partnership. We called it plunder. When we dared to ask for fair contracts, they sent troops. When we changed the rules, they sent sanctions. When we expelled their ambassadors, they threatened the Black Winter. And still we stand. Still we build. Tiani's speech then zeroed in on the precise economic anatomy of the new projects, turning every detail into a dagger aimed at the old extractive model. This Confederal Investment and Development Bank is our declaration of financial independence. No more Eurobond interest rates that bleed us dry. No more IMF conditionalities that force us to sell our strategic assets at fire sale prices. With nearly $900 million already seeded from our own treasuries, and a guaranteed 5% levy from each of our budgets, this bank will finance what the West never wanted us to have: local uranium enrichment, solar megafarms across the desert that could power the entire region, and processing plants that turn our raw yellowcake into actual revenue instead of French kilowatt-hours. For the first time, Niger's uranium will finance Niger's future, not Paris's suburbs. He pivoted to the airline and railway with the cold precision of a logistician who had studied every bottleneck the old system imposed. The new AES airline ends the humiliation of routing through Rawasi or Orly just to visit Bamako or Ouaga. Our businessmen will fly direct. Our minerals will fly direct. Our people will no longer pay a colonial tax in the sky. And the Trans-Sahel Railway? That steel serpent we are laying across the desert is the ultimate middle finger to the old road networks they left us deliberately broken. Transport costs for our uranium and gold will collapse by more than 70%. Our manganese and phosphate will reach Algerian ports in days, not weeks of ambush-prone trucking. Farmers in the Niger River Valley will ship their surplus millet and livestock to new markets without spoilage. The railway alone will generate thousands of permanent jobs: engineers, mechanics, signalmen, drawn from our own youth who once saw only two choices: join the jihad or cross the sea in death boats. Tiani's rhetoric grew sharper still, addressing the investor class the West insists must always come with strings attached. To every genuine investor watching from Ankara, from Riyadh, from Beijing, from Moscow, the door is wide open. Bring your capital, bring your technology, but leave your conditions at the border. This bank will not ask you to offshore your profits. This railway will not demand you route through French-controlled ports. This airline will not force you to pay kickbacks to European middlemen. What we offer is simple: security guaranteed by our joint AES forces, contracts enforced by sovereign law, and returns calculated in reality, not in the fantasies of Paris think tanks. He turned briefly toward Traore and Goita, the three men forming an unmistakable triangle of defiance on stage. Captain Traore spoke of dignity. Colonel Goita spoke of unity. I speak of sovereignty with teeth. Niger will no longer be the uranium mine that lights up Europe while our mothers give birth by candlelight. With these three projects, we are wiring the Sahel into a single economic organism: self-healing, self-financing, self-defending. And if they try to strangle us again with sanctions or propaganda or financial sabotage, they will discover that the artery they once controlled now pumps blood in the opposite direction. Toward Africa, toward the future, toward freedom. The general stepped back, the hall erupting once more. No flowery metaphors. No appeals to the international community. Just raw arithmetic and unapologetic power. The same uranium that powered France's nuclear arsenal now funding an independent rail-air finance axis that could, within a decade, reroute billions in trade flows away from European hubs and into AES coffers. Western analysts glued to the live translation reportedly fell silent. Because buried in Tiani's soldierly prose was the inescapable math. Niger alone produces over 2,000 tons of uranium concentrate annually. Even a modest shift toward local processing and AES-controlled logistics could redirect hundreds of millions in hard currency every year. Straight into the new bank, straight into the railway maintenance fund, straight into the airline's expansion fleet. It was no longer theory. The projects were capitalized. The leaders were united. And the speech had just made it official. The Sahel was no longer asking for a seat at the table. It was building its own table, forged from the very resources the old empire had always claimed as its birthright. And the world's capital flows were already beginning to recalculate the risk. As the atmosphere grew heavier with layered meaning and rising anticipation, the final address came from Assimi Goita, a central figure in the Sahel's shifting political and economic landscape. Unlike the previous speeches, Goita did not begin with history or grievance. He began with clarity. Standing firm, he spoke of Mali not as a nation in transition, but as a nation in repositioning. His tone was composed, deliberate, almost strategic, as though each word was designed to signal not just intent, but capability. He described the joint airline, railway, and investment bank as structures of permanence. not temporary solutions, but foundations meant to outlive current governments and define the region's trajectory for decades. Then he leaned into something deeper: coordination. Goita emphasized that for too long, African development had been approached in fragments, country by country, policy by policy, without true alignment. What was happening now, he suggested, was different. This was synchronization, a deliberate effort by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali to move not just together, but with shared timing, shared priorities, and shared outcomes. And that, he implied, is where the real power lies. When he spoke about the railway, his vision extended beyond transport. He framed it as an economic artery, one that would carry not just goods, but industrial growth. He spoke of future processing plants, manufacturing zones, and trade hubs emerging along its path. Instead of exporting raw materials, he envisioned a Sahel that refines, produces, and exports finished goods, keeping value within the region. On the airline, he was equally precise. He highlighted its role not just in business, but in diplomacy and perception. A region that controls its skies, he argued, controls its narrative. It becomes accessible, visible, and open on its own terms, not filtered through external systems. For investors and partners, that visibility alone could begin to reshape how the Sahel is viewed globally. But it was when he addressed the investment bank that his speech took its most decisive turn. Goita spoke of capital as power. He outlined how access to funding determines which projects live or die, which sectors grow or stagnate. By establishing a regional financial institution, he argued, they were not just creating a bank, they were creating a decision-making center. One that prioritizes local realities, regional goals, and long-term stability over short-term external interests. He paused briefly, then added a line that resonated across the room. A nation that cannot finance its vision will always borrow its future. The weight of that statement lingered. Then came unity, but not as rhetoric. Goita made it clear that this alliance was not born out of convenience, but necessity. That in a world increasingly shaped by blocs and alliances, standing alone was no longer viable. By aligning their economic strategies, these nations were not just strengthening themselves, they were redefining their bargaining power on the global stage. He acknowledged, as the others had, that this path would not be easy. There would be pressures. There would be skepticism. There would be attempts, subtle or direct, to test the strength of this emerging bloc. But unlike the cautious tones often heard in diplomacy, Goita's message carried a quiet certainty. They were prepared, not just to build, but to defend what they were building. And then, in his closing words, he brought everything together. He did not speak of opposition, or of the West, or of any specific external force. Instead, he focused inward, on what this moment represents for the people of the Sahel. He spoke of dignity, of a generation that may finally see the benefits of their own resources reflected in their own economies, of borders becoming bridges rather than barriers, of a future where decisions affecting millions are made within the region, not beyond it. And as he stepped back, the three speeches, by Ibrahim Traore, Abdourahamane Tiani, and Assimi Goita, no longer felt like separate addresses. They felt coordinated, layered, intentional. What began as an announcement of infrastructure had unfolded into something far more profound, a declaration of economic direction, a redefinition of regional identity, and a signal, subtle yet unmistakable, that the Sahel is no longer waiting to be shaped by external forces. It is beginning to shape itself.